Good morning, everyone. My name is Aisha Spradley, professional learning and instruction coordinator for PSAYDN, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session. On behalf of PSAYDN, we would like to invite you to today's webinar, which is Trauma Informed OST Part 2, which will focus on best practices for serving youth in 9th through 12th grade. It's my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Brewster. Lindsay is a trauma-informed social worker and Spanish teacher from Bucks County. She's an advocate for the integration of trauma-informed practices in all educational settings. She's committed to fostering resilience and resourcefulness in students, educators, and caregivers alike. To ground our work today, we have an icebreaker question. In one word, what feeling do you want youth to experience while in your space? You can put that in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Okay, so far we have safety from Annette. Michelle said safety. Okay. We also have belonging from Jacob. Safe again, safe from Lindsay. Agency, we love that. Laura said safe, belonging. Those are wonderful phrases. I'll give about 15 more seconds just in case anyone else has anything they might want to say. Safe again. Okay, so safety is definitely important. We love that because whenever you have safety, it helps provide a safe place to land. So we love that. And trust. Perfect. Thank you for sharing. We hope the strategies that you learn in this session will help you as you create sanctuaries and safe spaces for the youth that are in your care. And now I will hand it over to Lindsay.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. Just seeing that, just hearing the words that everybody wants your students to feel safe with you and feel like they belong. That intention is the framework for how you're going to be with that person. And so it's already set, and you being here is already showing your commitment to that. And I very much honor this work that I do and honor the fact that people are willing to learn more about it. So this will be for high school out of school time settings. I am currently working at an at-risk school for students who are experiencing a lot of trauma, and they're in middle and high school. So I might be bringing up some stories there, and I also would love to hear from you. So we're going to talk about the overview of trauma, its impacts, focusing on teens, and then what does trauma-informed social emotional learning look like for high school students, and also providing you with tools, activities, and scenarios. You'll also receive a resource. There's 15 pages of all different types of language to use, different links to click, a lot of coping skills in there. So whatever you can get from today's session is great. And then you can do a little more research with the resources provided. So I'm hoping to shift perspectives into a trauma-informed social emotional learning and encourage you to utilize these strategies to reach students affected by trauma and avoid re-traumatization. So I just want to pause for a second. This is something that I do in every class that I teach, as well as during the day with my students, is I set the tone and we release what just happened moments ago so that we can start fresh now. So I'd like for you to join me for that. So we just take 3 deep breaths in. So take a deep breath in and then let it go. Another one. And let it go. And last. And let it go. If anything from today, if you can incorporate this pause at any given moment, even before you're about to have a deeper conversation, allowing for the dust to settle for a moment to restart. My students ask to take these deep breaths if I forget, so it does seem to resonate with them. Okay. So trauma one-on-one, I'll show you a clip in just a moment of Gabor Mate, who's a leader in trauma-informed care. But this trauma typically is anything that is too overwhelming for someone to cope. So that will be depending on the person. It's not going to affect the same to each person. But if it's when our nervous system and our mental and emotional capacity is too much, it's overboard. And it is an internal wound. So we often don't see it on the outside. And it can be situational, it can be complex with multiple things involved, or it can be chronic over a long period of time. It does affect our ability to function properly. It is considered a disability, and it will often affect interpersonal relationships. Just for a moment here, I'd like for you to hear from Gabor Mate about his view of trauma.
Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. That's a good thing, by the way, because if trauma, in terms of what happened to me as a Jewish infant under the Nazis, if that was the trauma, I'll never be a person who wasn't a Jewish infant under the Nazis and during that period of genocide. If trauma is the fact that you were abused as a child, you will never be a person who wasn't abused as a child. Trauma can also be inflicted not by what happens to you, but what doesn't happen that should happen. So that when your needs aren't met, that can wound as well. Even though you weren't overtly hurt, you were still wounded by not having your essential human needs met. But if that was the trauma of what happened to you, guess what? It'll never unhappen. But if trauma is what happened inside you, the wound that you sustained, the meaning you made of it, the way you then came to believe certain things about yourself or the world or other people. And if trauma was that disconnection from the authentic self, well, guess what? Good news. That can be restored at any moment. So that's why, Sharon, when you talk about the new view of trauma, when we see it as that wound, as long as we see it that way, it's a wound that can be healed. If we see it as a bunch of things that happened, that'll never unhappen. But we don't have to, the biggest lesson for me, and one I continue to have to learn, is that we don't have to allow it to define our lives, how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we relate to the world, other people, how we relate to possibility, how we relate to even spiritual transformation.
So Gabor Mate was just talking about how you don't become the trauma that happened to you. The internal wound is what happens, and it's how you create the story from that wound and the belief system that you have. So yes, the event might be over, but it's not over internally. And that is what something like, oh, get over it, or, that was in the past. That's not going to be helpful for someone who experiences trauma, because it starts to become an internal wound. And he sees that as a positive thing, that you're not going to be the situation, you're going to be what you make of that. And that involves being with people who understand you and can work with that. And that's what we're trying to do here. So trauma, in terms of having reactions and having all of the symptoms of trauma, you might see some of these things, and you might notice this in some students that you have, or yourself, or your family, or friends. So I just wanted to take a moment to take a look at all of these symptoms of trauma, and maybe think of someone, a student, a family member, again, yourself, and say, oh, wait, maybe these things might be related to trauma and not because something's wrong with me or I have this disorder or that. Most often it's the underlying something traumatic happened and it wasn't resolved. Because Gabor Mate also talks about how it can be resolved almost instantaneously, especially with children and teenagers, because you are recognizing it and you're bringing it to light, and then you're going to move it through. It's often when we suppress it and we think we can just get over it that it creates these symptoms. It could also create chronic disease that will often just be seen isolated from something that's actually traumatic that is having an effect on your body and then creating a disease. So we see a lot of these symptoms being categorized as disorders outside of just having, not just, but having trauma. And if we treat the trauma first and we go there, then we might notice that you'll have a break from those symptoms and not have a disorder. So this is something that we're trying to shift in the trauma-informed community. Okay, but what we see here, and what I'm excited to know, that you doing what you're doing already just being there and being people that care. You're showing up here today. You're showing that you care. And that alone reduces trauma-related symptoms up to 40%. And that is from before COVID. So I imagine even now, it's even higher to know that there's supportive staff on board. The big shift is the perspective. Once we shift our perspective, the whole story changes. So we often hear from people saying, oh my God, what's wrong with that kid? What is wrong with that kid? And I hear it all the time, even in the school that I'm trying to, work with a group of people and be on the same page. But that's a big difference of saying, what's wrong with that kid? That kid's crazy, or that kid's this, versus, oh my gosh, what happened to that person? What happened to me? What happened? That way we separate ourselves from you, that person, or you being the problem, and we work with the problem at hand, which is what happened, versus your reaction to it, because you're trying to understand it as well. So I encourage you to pass that one along. Okay, so there's ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, as most people who are aware of trauma-informed care have seen this. And so above the tree, what we see with the leaves and the branches are the adverse experiences that were studied, which you can see here: emotional, sexual abuse, physical abuse, divorce, mental illness in the family, specifically maternal depression, homelessness, domestic violence. But what we see, and as a social worker, what we work with are systems of care, that it's not these silos of communication, not these silos groups. It's everything that's underneath of it. And that is systemic. So it's poverty, discrimination, poor housing, affordability, lack of opportunity, and social capital. All of these things that go in a community sense are what are actually causing more of the adverse childhood experiences. So it is collective. It is all affecting one and another. So high school students reported 76% having at least one adverse childhood experience, and 18.5 having more than 4 or more. And this was done before COVID. So now, since COVID, every single person has experienced this collective trauma of change. And a lot of it has affected individuals differently, but as a whole, we've all experienced this. So now it's at least 2 or more ACEs. A lot of the times you'll see emotional abuse, physical abuse, and then household poor mental health, which is what I work with these students that are often the symptoms of household dysfunction. So they can be considered scapegoats, like, oh, you're the problem and we need to fix you, and you're this and this is wrong with you. And most of the time they are the symptoms of what is happening in their environment. And the trauma responses that we typically see are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawning is one that I think can go under the radar because it is socially acceptable a lot of the times to be a people pleaser, and that this is just something that people say, I'm a people pleaser, but really that is actually stemming from most of the time from a traumatic response of making sure that you're pleasing the person that originally caused the trauma, so that you don't have more discomfort or more trauma from that person. And you start to be not tuned to your own needs, but tuned to others. The other ones that we see, the aggression, that fight, and the freeze and the flight and the running away from things and the freaking out, that we say we need discipline for these kids. And this is where I'm saying, wait, no. You want to connect before you correct, because often the time it isn't a discipline thing because they're behaviorally just, acting up. It's, wait a minute, they might have been triggered. And when we're triggered, it could be from so many different areas. So we want to find out what is making that person triggered. And these are these typical responses. So I'm asking to have a sense of, wait a minute, this might not be this child specific behavioral problem versus this is a trauma response. And if we treat it as a trauma response, we can help that child calm down and come back online, and the behavior will shift. But when we change it to, now you have lunch attention, or now you have this, or now you must sit and be away from everybody because you're causing problems, then we're actually creating more problems and more trauma responses. Okay, so when we are doing that, the three main area of the brain, you're going to look at the bottom, right, where it says survival. And that is, am I safe? That's the question that's asked. When you are triggered, you go to the brainstem. So nothing else is online. Your relational, your emotional, your cognition, all offline. You're going into those trauma responses because you do not, that child or you or whoever we're talking about doesn't feel safe. Okay, so they're just protecting themselves. It's often the time they're, not taking it personally is a big part of this. Don't take it so personally. They are just protecting themselves. And a lot of the times it might look like it's a self-sabotage thing because it makes it worse. But often that's because the person who's disciplining isn't recognizing, oh, this is something just happened that triggered them. And let's get them back to feeling loved, safe, loved, and able to learn. So when I say that piece, that last part is that prefrontal that we will see that adolescents are still forming that part. We can't be talking and rationalizing and having long lectures with kids that are in the traumatic state. The goal is to get them feeling safe, so then they are seen and heard, feeling cared about, and then the cognition piece of having a conversation comes. Dr. Bruce Perry is another trauma researcher, and he is showing that there's a neuro, which involves the brain, a sequence, the model. So you have the brainstem, the midbrain, the limbic is your emotional sense, and then the cortex, the prefrontal. That is controlling yourself, that's having empathy, that's seeing the future, that's able to read and write in a coherent manner. All of that is coming from that cortical area. But again, when we're in the fight or flight, which can last a really long time, especially if it's not interrupted by someone or yourself by calming it down, you can stay in that for a long time, and it can be challenging to come out of it as well. So we have to practice patience here, but just noticing that there is a sequence to it, and we do need to get people to feel safe before any of those other things can happen that we want from that student or that person or ourselves or the people in our lives, because this is going to be affecting everybody. So this is something I teach my students. I teach anybody that are doing this just so they understand themselves. So it's called flipping the lid. So even if you want to join me, you're welcome to, just to practice it. So your thumb right here, this is going to be your brain stem. And so when you are engaged, your brain stem is nicely tucked into your limbic system right here in your palm, your emotional regulation, and then your cortex, your prefrontal cortex, your frontal cortex here. So when we're online, we're able to rationalize, we're able to empathize, we're able to connect, feel safe. But when we're triggered, the lid is popped. And now that brainstem, which I call the lizard brain because it's so reactional, it's not, I don't just call it, it is called the lizard brain because it is just for survival. So I'll say, looks like you're in your lizard brain now. So we need to get out of our lizard brain and come back online. How do we get there? I'm going to connect with you. I'm not going to punish you right away. I'm not going to discipline you right away. I'm going to make sure you feel safe and calm with me. So then we can put our lid back on. And I don't let them leave until I know their lid is back on. Which again, don't let them leave. If they want to leave and they feel trapped, you want to let them out. But I try to make sure they feel safe before they leave talking with me. And just a side note, big one, that you don't need to be their therapist. You know, especially if you're not a therapist, but you can be therapeutic just by your presence alone. You're not going to be able to solve their trauma, or you don't want to get in deep into their trauma. Like, tell me everything about it, especially if you don't know how to close and contain that. like asking them for all those things, telling them, and then they leave. It's like, wait a minute, we need to make sure they are grounded and all of these things. And so if they do happen to tell you their trauma, then you want to absolutely have other adults involved, like the people in their lives, letting them know that you'll reach out for support. But I do encourage you to just recognize that your presence alone, your loving, caring attention is therapeutic. Okay, and it takes place in safe relationships. That's where the healing happens. It's very rare that the healing will happen alone, especially for a child or an adolescent. They often need people who are honest, dependable, predictable. Big one. They need to be able to predict what is going to happen. That helps regulate, co-regulate. You pay attention, you notice things about them. They know that you're really caring about them. That will provide that containment for them to feel safe enough to heal. And healing can happen little by little by little, or it can be a big moment for them. But most of the time, it's chipping away a little bit at their resistance to allow them to feel safer with you. Okay, so using the Dr. Perry model of the brainstem all the way to the cortical is the relational piece to it of like, how do we connect? So the first thing you want to do is get them regulated. And the best thing you can do for regulation is breathe. Breathe with them. I will often ask them, breathe with me. And they might not want to look me in the eye. They often don't. I work with someone online and she puts her camera off. She doesn't want me to see her, but I'm like, that's okay. I don't care. It's not about me, but I want you to regulate with me. And here's the thing. If you are dysregulated, if you are triggered, right, that's going to be very hard for you to regulate them. So you want to make sure you take really good care of yourself and notice when you're triggered alone, because we are all being triggered left and right sometimes. And that's okay, but we need to make sure before we regulate the child, we regulate ourselves first. And then that co-regulation happens. And that can also happen, I'll pass a ball back and forth. It's that bilateral stimulation, going back, forth, taking a breath. It doesn't take long. It could take just a couple minutes at times. Once they feel safe, then you start to relate to them by saying things like, I see you, I hear you, I understand your point of view. And then once you relate and say, hey, I'm here for you, then you can go into the reasonable, like, hey, I see you, I hear you, I care about you. And what happened? Someone else got hurt in that situation, or that was really scary for some people or yourselves. So you start reasoning, hey, how else can we solve these problems? Or what else can I do for you? But first, just make sure they feel safe with you and know that they care. And then they're going to let their guard down a little bit more, hopefully. Okay, so we need to be the calm when they have that storm so that everyone can float along together. It is a daily practice. This does not happen overnight, but the intention is really important. Okay, another skill besides they're very simple skills, but they're really important. So the breathing is one, and then I'll have my students, the younger ones do a little better with this, but my older ones will at least shake out their hands. You want to discharge the coiled energy. When the trauma happens in the body, it's coiled. So as someone with lived experience of complex and situational PTSD, I live with it every day. I'm aware of what's happening. I'm like, oh, that event stayed in me. It stays in your body. It lives in your body. It's not just in your mind. It stays in, and it's a coiled energy if it's not addressed. So you want to actually discharge the energy, and a lot of it is through practice, which is your body's movement. So shaking it out, just even your hands after a tough experience or just frustration, not to swallow it or not cry. You want to release it, and it'll take maybe 30 to 60 seconds to actually feel better after that. So I encourage those little breaks, those pauses for a deep breath, and just shake it out, shake it out, shake it out. And I think sometimes we just naturally do that and not recognizing that's our body releasing that energy that was really high charged. So what we know about that adolescent brain, their heightened emotional sensitivity. We know this, they're live wires because they're under construction. Right? And they still think they know all the answers at the same time. So it's frustrating. They're developing that logic and reasoning. They're not quite there yet. It takes age 25, sometimes much more, especially if you have attention deficit, that can take even longer. They want that dopamine hit. And if you know those kids on the phone, the scrolling, that dopamine, oh my gosh, as soon as you take that away, they get frustrated, they're angry, they're bored, they're all these things because their body is used to a dopamine hit over and over and over again. And they're always looking for that reward, even just as an adolescent. And now it's heightened now with social media. They ultimately want to feel like they belong and they want community, and there's an increased need for that. And they are learning to separate themselves from their family identity, their community identity, and looking at their individual identity and self-concept. That's the big part of this too, to not take it so personal through these phases that they're going through. They're learning about themselves. But in the meantime, with all of that, if there's trauma, these things can be underdeveloped. There can be stunting of their growth in any one of these areas if the trauma is still unresolved. I'm going to talk about just highlighting some of these. You'll see it in my resource manual too, that you might see the concentration and remembering. I want to bring that up because memory it affects the memory so bad. I mean, I have to write everything down. And if I didn't write in journals, I would have a hard time remembering my life. Other people have to remember because the brain, if I'm in survival mode for so long, my brain's not putting a ton of stuff in long-term memory. It's just trying to keep me, what do I need to know right now? So it will affect your memory. In trouble concentrating, you could be disorganized, zoning out a lot. That dissociation happens where you just don't want to connect with your body. Sudden drop in school engagement, can't really plan or think. Again, it's not just, oh, they're a teenager, it's prefrontal, but it's prefrontal and it's damaged. So there's two parts of it that they're supposed to be growing with there, but then there's a stunt to it because they're stuck in survival mode. So we need to be more of their prefrontal cortex walking around. You will see that irritability, and this is the hard part. It's like, is it just them being a teenager or is it a teenager with trauma? And either way, treat it as though it is trauma so that it can get that systemic healing. A lot of impulsivity and risky behavior. I want to highlight that. Sexual, especially with teenagers, the risk of especially if they have been sexually abused, will go in to repeat it with other partners because it's what they know. So that impulsivity is heightened and that risky behavior. They might also fear your authority or want to take over your authority. That control can happen too. They, like I talked about in the very beginning, especially if it's chronic or complex, you will have a difficult time forming relationships, and the people pleasing could not just be like, oh, what a nice person. It's like, why are you not paying attention to yourself? Why are you noticing my needs more than yours? So we want to having come back to themselves. And then communication. I always ask, all the time, even when I'm in a situation where there needs to be some discipline involved, I'll say, are you being kind in your mind? Because that's going to be more important than anything that anyone else says to you. What are you saying to yourself? We need to change that because it plants these seeds that they're not good enough, that they're not worthy of even getting the care that they need. So you might see them running away, suicide ideation, often talking a lot about violence or enjoying watching things that are violent. And then the somatic, the stomach aches, that's a big one, especially with teenagers, because we have nervous system in our gut. We create a ton of serotonin there. So when our gut is off, there's a complete gut to brain connection in your nervous system. So there's a direct connection there. And a lot of the times it'll be like, oh, my stomach hurts. And it might just be a stomach ache, but it also might be that they're feeling anxious and they're having some traumatic symptoms. And then also it might be like, oh, you're overreacting, or there's like this hyper awareness of their surroundings, or they might reenact, especially if they're in art, they might show that through too. Right. So social emotional learning is the piece that we might do here and there, but not noticing that there also needs to be a trauma-informed piece to it, because we want to create the conditions for trust, safety, and post-traumatic growth. Which can be really wonderful. I've had multiple moments of that, and that is because I've found people that I can trust and feel safe with. And like you all said in the beginning, that's what you are trying to get for those kids, to feel like they can trust you, feel safe with you, so that they can grow and feel like they belong. So you are already doing the trauma-informed social emotional piece there. We do know that we have these components. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. These are all the components of social emotional learning according to CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning. But as you also see that I talked about the systems in social work, we are always thinking systems. It's never just, it's the person, it's pie, person in environment. It's not a silo of an individual and their communication strategies. It's what they're responding and reacting to in their classroom climate, in their school-wide culture, in their partnerships with others, and their communities abroad. Not just abroad, but here, broad communities, I meant. So if you've seen this before, these are the main things that we're working with. Okay. Our goal is that regulating, like I said before, we want to regulate before we relate, before we reason. We want to be flexible. We want approaches that will change. We can be flexible with whatever they need at that time. Avoiding re-traumatization is a big one. You don't want to be the person that if you are the person that triggers them, then we take some self-reflection piece too of what can I do? How can I become a safer person and more predictable for them so that they don't have to walk on eggshells? They know what's coming. And having a little bit of more compassion for their reactions and not putting it as such a discipline thing as, oh man, this person's just triggered. My God, they must be feeling all these things, all the hormones that surge, that adrenaline that surges when you're in fight or flight is survival. So you'll do anything. I mean, we'll do anything to stay alive. And that's in one piece, great. But the emotions that come, that adrenaline that comes, can often be punished. But we want to have a little compassion of being like, wow, their body's also going through that surge too. Let's have them feel calm first. And that their communication is signaling for support. They're communicating a need. Ultimately, they're needing either support or they're showing you that something's wrong. And can you that notices that, because I can't explain it in my trauma brain. Approaches like taking a break. Often the time in the school that I'm at, that we're working with these teachers, and this is my first year there, but they'll send them out of the room, just get out, and then they send them to the dean's office. And if they make their way to counseling or they make their way to my social work office, they might get there. But most of the time, they send them right to the disciplinarians, and I will often then see repeated discipline issues after that, because they feel isolated and they want to feel like they belong. So it's the exact opposite. So often the time I'll have them tell teachers, can they come to my room where there is a white noise machine, there's plants, there's a calming area, there's a weighted pillow, and they can just sit there for a couple minutes to regulate so they can come back in. So when that happens, we see the disruption of the cycle of just keep getting in trouble over and over again because they feel safe. So SEL, just as like, okay, we're just going to have this one activity and having it isolated, the goal is to have it embedded. You should have these as often as possible, check-ins, even in circles and small groups. They want to feel like they belong, so they might want to hear what other people are feeling too. Group games, real life scenarios. And then that discipline piece of respect the rules, right? Like, you must follow this. That strictness is often going to be met with like, oh, heck no, because that does not feel safe. rules are important, safety is important, but not having the flexibility of the neurodivergence in your community, the way that different people are going to respond to these, we want to co-create with youth. I will often say, well, what would you want them to do in that scenario? Because clearly your teacher was really frustrated. You don't like that they're disciplining you like this. What would you want? Because we know something needs to happen. So I will often try to get something from them so they feel like they're heard. So co-creating helps create that reflection. And then again, that what happened instead of what is wrong with you, get out of here, or sit down, or you're not playing in this game, or I'm talking to your mom, or that's ridiculous. It's more like, hey, what's going on? Let's reflect and let's repair instead of just ignoring it and letting it go. That repair piece is huge. And also that a big one at the top, we're expecting them to regulate independently, but a lot of the times they don't know what to do. So when we say calm down, go calm down, what does that look like? Often the times they will realize they need to breathe, but some of them will hold that in, right? And it creates that panic. So we want to be very specific about, okay, go over there and sit down, take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to get you some water. I'm coming over to you, and we're going to help calm you down. So I'll be very specific about what that calm down means. And finding all the multiple ways. It's not going to be just 1 or 2 things. It could be many different ways that a child or a person needs to cope. And that conflict, again, I'll say it again, connect before you correct. So the relational repair opportunity is big. Even if there is a bit of a blowout, following up with later and repairing that is going to be so important to have that opportunity so that you can rebuild that trust. And having not just special sessions for social emotional learning, but really embedding it in the community. Okay, so some more strategies here, and we won't go through each one as I could talk about all of these for hours, but I have these on your resource page too. But for each one, I'll bring one up just for this moment, and then you can reflect more afterwards. But the restorative practice here is really big. We want the repair, and they want to know that if they made a mistake, that the growth is understood and that it's okay because that's how we grow, and let's repair that. And they might not get that at home. They might not get that in their other communities, but if they can get that with you, they can know what that feels like. And then they might be able to do that in their own way with other people. Also, boundaries and consent. I always show them that if they're getting too close or I'm being triggered, I'll say, hey, I need some space. Let's come back. This does not feel good for me. And it gives them the vocabulary to say the same thing back to me if they need to. And then those connections. Decision-making, slowing down, like the very beginning, that pause before we want to get into it, that space, that pause right before we react will teach us how to respond. So if we keep practicing those pauses, stop, breathe, observe what's going around before we can communicate and show them that, then we can be models for that. And again, that last one. Why did you do that? What is wrong with you? Is what happened? Just what happened, saying you're not the problem is the problem. Let's look at the problem and solve the problem versus fixing you because you're the problem. The goal is to separate them from the problem so that we can see other ways to cope without the shame. The shame piece is big, and shame alone will put someone in a trauma response. If they feel shamed, then they do not trust you. Okay, let me go back for a second. Social awareness piece, the empathy piece and connecting, a lot of social stories, what I'll do, especially when kids are shutting down and really just don't want to talk to me, I'll just sit there near them and I'll say, this reminds me of one time when and I'll share a story, either it's a real story or it's a story that I'm hearing from somebody else, and I'll just personalize it and show them that I also struggled and this is how I made a mistake. That helps them see that they're not alone, and it helps build perspective. And reflective listening is a big one. This is done a lot in play therapy too, with youngers, but it of course can work across the board. You just say what they're doing. So I'll say, okay, your feet are you're shaking your feet right now. Okay, your head is down. I'll just start noticing things and I'll just say it so that they feel like, oh, I'm seen, I'm heard. And then with the reflective listening is you summarize back. So even if you don't agree what they're saying, you summarize it. So then you'll see like this, yeah, they actually are listening to me. So what I hear you saying is, before you start putting in your own 2 cents. And then that circle time, I bring in a lot with high school because they want to feel a part of a community. They want to feel heard. And we talked about the relationship skills and the decision making. So this is a scenario. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute because I would love to, we're going to start hearing from you too. This scenario just happened the other day. And I want to kind of talk about that. I had a student who is traumatized from a ton of different things. I'm her safe person. But unfortunately, during something where she, in the hallway between third and fourth period, she wanted to fight another girl. She said, "You want to fight?" And that girl said, "No, I don't want to fight." But she didn't take that for an answer. So a team of people came to discipline her, like 4 people, and they put her in a room. They not locked the room. They shut the door and said, "You're not leaving. You're not going." So you trap the student, and that student exploded. I mean, they were like, she was incoherent. I mean, and the way that they were responding, again, they're all learning too in this scenario, and I'm learning to work with them. But they were like, oh, she was acting crazy. She was saying all this. And I said, well, yeah, you just trapped a child that has a history of trauma. So even if you didn't like what she did, you just put her in a situation where her limbic system is off, her cortex is off, and she is in lizard brain. So she flipped out. Then finally they let her go to the bathroom. Apparently she wrote stuff on the wall, and they kicked her out of school. They kicked her out, and she's online. And I was like, hey, let's look at this. How else could we have handled that? And I kind of want to bring some of this stuff to the table now, and give us some time to talk about, in that scenario, if you have a student that you feel is unsafe for whatever reason around other people, how do we keep everyone else safe and that child safe too, to avoid that re-traumatization of then being so disciplined and punished for having a trauma response because someone told her that a girl wanted to fight her? So my question to you is, in scenarios here, like where you know you need to keep a child safe, what is a different way that you might have handled that? And I'm happy to, even if you want to type it in the chat, you're welcome to, or I can tell you what I ended up doing in that situation.
I can share. I was trying to find the raise hand, but I couldn't. I know for me, because I've had this happen for our scholars, I typically try and get the ones who are like in a more like balanced state, to have them step away from the situation because they're a lot more calmer. Then I put the focus on my student who's having the most difficulty. So in an instance like that, of course, it's easier to move one student versus like a group of students. So I would have just said, hey, like, come on, let's just take a walk. Very simple, language, because when they're escalated and triggered, they're not hearing us. So I tried my best to keep it really simple for them. And I definitely would not have locked them into a room. I would have said like, hey, let's take a walk. Can we, go to this space over here, just to talk with one another. So it doesn't feel re-triggering for them and traumatizing, because our first response is always to like discipline when a behavior has like transpired, but it's like, wait a minute, let's take a pause first, and then we can, like you said, connect first, and then we can worry about correcting whatever happened later on. But I think that that's the best way, because that gives them an opportunity to calm down, and then you'll be surprised, like they'll start to talk and come around. It may take a little bit of a moment, but giving them that opportunity, one, to say, hey, you're human. We make mistakes. This thing just happened, but how can we fix it? Versus kicking them out, and now they lose access to the supports that they clearly need being physically in a school setting.
Thank you so much, Kara. That is exactly, what you were saying and talking about. It seems you already are in that awareness that, wait a minute, first, I like how you said the kids that are more regulated, like let them do their own thing for a little bit, come back to them, but let's make sure we regulate child. And often walking, that movement piece, like the shaking out, you want that discharge of energy. So movement is important, not sit down here, sit and let it sink into all of your body. And then we're just going to talk to you and we're going to discipline you. Like that's going to keep the trigger. So I appreciate that approach. And I'm happy that that's where your mind is too. And I see a few here too. Michelle wrote one person instead of a team. Yeah. Yes. So my, exactly what happened. I was like, okay, guys, like, I know you're caring people. I know you know, these kids and it's my first year here, but I'm her safe person. Why didn't you just come and get her safe person? Why did you need to do that? And something that we had to talk was, hey, are we in our ego, friends? Are we in our ego of wanting to be making sure that you're the one disciplining or you're the one taking care of it, or you want that relationship with that child versus, wait, Miss Brewster has that relationship with the child. Let's find her safe person. So having that one person versus a bunch of people that have a good relationship is crucial. And when I talk to her now, I have to meet her online every day. She said, I don't know why they didn't just get you. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, but I'm working with them. They're learning. We're learning. So definitely not putting them in a room, going for a walk, moving the energy out, and not just having more than one person in the room with them. And also speak to understand, not be quick to reprimand. I love that. Yes. And that's in line with connect before correct. And again, it's not about them meeting your needs. And a lot of the times it can seem like that. Like, we want you to follow these rules. And if you don't follow these exact rules, it's like, wait a minute, like, let's just really flesh out this scenario and see what's going on here. Thank you. Thank you all for seeing that, for understanding why that would be traumatic for this person. And knowing that ultimately it's the simplest things that will bring that person back to calm, because they just want to be seen and they want to be validated and heard, and then they can listen to you. So thank you again for that response. And I want to give some time. Does anyone have any questions that came up throughout the presentation, or questions they have, or situations that they've been in and they want some feedback on? Want to give some time for you to speak about your life experiences.
Sorry, I'm trying to find all the buttons. And I hope it's okay if I stay off camera.
Sure.
So I mainly teach online, and I feel like I get a lot of the kids that you're describing, Ms. Brewster, the ones who kind of get chucked out of school for whatever reason. So I find that I'm dealing with this really wide variety. I have some kids who are prodigies, who are not participating in who can't participate in person because they're traveling the world playing tennis or piano, right? And then I have the kids who I'm getting this my inbox is kind of inundated right now with parents and kids saying, well, what can I do to catch up? And I'm like, well, it's 7 days until the class ends. I don't really know what to say. So I guess what mine is more of a question. Aside from taking the gentlest but firmest, but not firm, that's not the right word, the gentlest but most matter of fact, that doesn't have any judgment in it, but simply has, this is where you're at, this is where you need to be. I can help you break it down into steps. I'm just wondering, the discipline I'm dealing with isn't fighting or, I get every once in a while I get a kid telling me I suck, but I can take that. Just how do you help keep them on track? I always want to say in a loving way, but that's like coming from a different kind of, I used to be a Waldorf and
Okay.
Amelia,
Yes.
you're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I knew it.
And now I have, middle schoolers and high schoolers telling me I suck. So I'm like,
Yeah, a little different, right?
I can't sing about, Mother Earth to them. So finding ways to connect with them,
Mm,
so that is saying, I'm on the same page as you. I'm not your enemy.
mm.
This isn't a gotcha. This is just like there was a rubric and this is where you landed on it.
And that's, I mean, and this is, I just had this conversation yesterday, especially, I mean, people will call me like, oh, the hippie over there, just because I like restorative practices. I was like, guys, that's not trauma informed itself because I do approach that, but my relationships with those kids it works. So it's like, hey, wait, I'm going to own that. So I think what is also a piece of the social work piece is self-determination. So there's only so much that you can do in the kindest, firmest, matter of fact way and say, I'm here for you when you're ready to do this work. We're here for you. We got you. But you have to be responsible for this too, because oftentimes we'll want, especially in the school that I work with, like doing anything they can to get them to graduate. And I said, okay, but then what are we teaching them? That we're all going to do their work for them? I'm like, then they're going to just get this in, and they'll get this, like, of course I'm graduating. I'm like, well, you're not quite done all your work. So when I do this with the students, when I work with students who are behind in for various reasons and are telling me, again, don't take it personally. They're going through a lot of things anyway, and they don't like that they are in the situation, but having them learn from maybe not be getting the best grade or not, like letting them fail in a sense,
Right.
but knowing, hi, I'm still right here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you. Come back, come to me when you're ready, because sometimes it's just being there and not trying, okay, we'll do this and this and this and this. And they get overwhelmed. And it's like, okay,
Right.
take a minute. You still have to follow through with consequences. There still is a rubric, and I'm here for you when you're ready. There's no punishment. There's just
Right.
consequences.
No, I really appreciate that language because I find myself, saying, you can do it. I know this feels overwhelming, but if you follow the pacing guide, you're going to be, but I would like to give them something a little more solid than that. That's like fluffy clouds.
Yeah. And a lot of the times there's the blocks from these kids, depending on the scenario of the type of trauma they're experiencing or whatever they're
Yes.
experiencing. Remember all of these things when you have something happen to you, it creates a belief system about yourself. So the language that we say, we might be like, you can do it, but they don't believe that they can. So
Right.
I will turn it and say, do you think you can do it? Like what's stopping you? What's stopping you? What can we do now? Versus just the encouragement of being a cheerleader. I want them to be their own cheerleader too. So I will ask those reflective questions of what are you saying in your mind about yourself?
Sure.
And then that will actually give you a lot of answers, because it's usually a belief system that is blocking them from actually following through.
No, I really appreciate this because I think I have forgotten that the reason I have this particular job is probably because most of the children, most of the learners are there because of trauma
Mm-hmm.
and because of multiple, adverse events. And
Yeah.
I think it's just clicked, which is sad. I mean, I've only had the job for a
No.
year, but it's also wonderful, I think, that it's clicked because it's going to help me be so much more prepared, especially for summer term when kids are coming in.
Oh gosh, yes. And
Yes.
that poses a whole
Thank-
sets of challenges too. Thank you, Annette. Thanks for sharing that.
No, thank
And
you.
don't shame yourself either. We don't want the kids to shame themselves, but be kind to yourself. Whenever it clicked, it clicked. I'm so glad you're here and that it happened because you were willing to learn more. So take it easy on yourself too. We have another 5 minutes. Is there anyone else that I can also bring up 2 other scenarios, but I would like to hear from you too. If there's anyone else that would like to bring something up that they learned throughout the presentation or they have a question from. Okay, so I'll bring up, another scenario that I'm working with a student who went under the radar. So oftentimes the people pleasing, we have a student that's a people pleaser, and this teacher was like, and talks about her that way. She's always so sweet. She always helps me. She's always asking me what I need. And I love that, and I was like, I'm sure that feels really good, but let's see why she's doing that. So I helped, give him a different perspective. But what happened was he was putting on a movie where there was a topic and she was triggered, which usually means that she's ready. Like sometimes if you're not triggered at all, you're not connected enough to be ready to work on it. So she was triggered and it was a sexual assault situation. And in that scenario, her disruption could be seen just as a disruption of you're disrupting the class, or she was acting a little strangely. And here she had been sexually abused as a child and no one had known anything. And it just so happened she watched that. So in that scenario, instead of kicking her out or telling her to go to see the dean, I happened to be right there and I took her in and helped her sit and be safe. And we didn't say anything at first. We just sat there and co-regulated. So my energy, I made sure I felt calm. And then slow and steady, she started to feel a little bit calmer, gave her a tissue, told her, take your time. Key words there, take your time. And what happens, and I will say this before we close, and this is a big one. For memory with trauma, your emotional part of your brain, your limbic system, does not know how long ago something happened. It only records things sequentially. It knows this happened before this, but it doesn't know how much time in between. So when people say, oh, that was 10 years ago, why is it still bothering me? That's because something wasn't resolved and your emotional brain is bringing it up. So oftentimes I had a very hard time for decades not being able to see a future at all because my past is my present. When you're emotionally unresolved in those ways, your past is everywhere around you. And so it is crucial to have that understanding too, that you might not have been, they might be like, oh, they're overreacting. Most of the time that trigger is triggering the exact event that happened in the first place. So your body will re-give you the same response. And that's why it's so important to work with these kids on regulation and breathing and moving it through their body, because the emotions need to be they need to be moved. They need to be seen, heard, and moved out. And to just be mindful about that for yourselves and other people, that until you resolve your traumas, your past is right here, right in front of you. And that was what's happening with this young woman. And eventually I just helped her get some support. She's going to go through something called NOVA, which is for the Network of Victim Assistance, and she's going to get some help there. That's free. But I bring that up because she would have went under the radar. So sometimes when we do bring up topics in these social circles for social emotional learning, that's a good time to see where maybe somebody needs a little more help because the quiet person's having a response to that. So just to be aware of those friends too that aren't verbalizing and acting out, they often still need your support in other ways. Okay.
All right, that concludes our session for today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'd like to thank Lindsay for taking the time to share this information with us about trauma-informed best practices in the out-of-school time space for grades 9 to 12. Please take a moment to complete the survey in the chat and put that in there. All right. And you can also join us for our next webinar on June 2nd with Dr. Natalie King entitled Let Your Light Shine, STEM is Ministry. And thank you again, Lindsay.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here and listening in.
Really quickly, I may have missed it really just that like, are there CUs for attendance?
Not for today.
Not for okay.
And I'm going to send Miss Aisha, I'll send her the resource and she'll send that out. And it has a lot of different language to use with these students too, and some coping skills and some links to some of the research. Bye, everybody.